Joan Quinn, a member of the California Arts Council and Beverly Hills Arts Commission, is the former West Coast editor of Andy Warhol's Interview magazine and society editor of the Herald Examiner. Her cover stories can be read in Venice and Detour magazines, and she is a contributing editor to California Apparel News. For the next half hour, Joan will bring you inside news and views on society, art, film, and the exhilarating worlds of these multifaceted people. Here is Joan Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and we have a great show for you today. Our guests are actor Michael York and his wife, photographer Pat York. Both of the Yorks, Pat and Michael, have written books. He'll talk about his book, which is titled Accidentally on Purpose, and it's for Simon & Schuster. And Pat's book, Going Strong, was published for Arcade. You'll remember seeing Michael in many films, including Accident, The Three Musketeers, Romeo and Juliet, and Cabaret, of course. We all remember that. Michael grew up near London and went to Oxford. But your bio says your career didn't start till you were 23. What did you do in between that time?
Well, I mean, professionally, that's when I became an actor.
At 23?
At 23, yes, after university at Oxford. But of course, lots of things have been building up to that, I mean, dramatically.
I would think so, yes.
I mean, at the age of 16, I was very lucky to join Michael Croft's Youth Theatre. He just started this organisation in London, putting all these kids together in Shakespeare plays. The idea not being to turn out little stars, but to give kids that experience of interdependence and enthusiasm and whatever that putting on a show does.
So you did start early out on the theatre.
Well, and it was very heady stuff. We were touring continental Europe and going to Berlin and Paris. And
is that right? At teenage?
Tender age of 16 and 17. So already that little bug in the blood was getting a workout. And then at Oxford, which was a kind of unofficial drama school, all the Monty Pythons were my contemporaries.
Oh, that's right. Were they in school with you at the
absolutely. And you know, it was all unofficial, but everyone was putting on shows and cabarets and whatever. It was a very kind of heady time.
Were they serious actors, or did you think of being a comedian at one time?
Well, we all did those kind of shows, yes. I think the Monty Python humor is a kind of natural outreach and a perfection. I mean, it took on a much more kind of lustrous and form of undergraduate humor.
So would you say it was accidentally on purpose?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, I mean, the title was meant to be snappy, also to be truthful.
The title of the book,
sure,
right.
To see if in a life, and especially in an actor's life, where there's no kind of logical progression from A to B, no kind of blueprint, no kind of guarantees, perhaps more than a kind of a regular job where there is a kind of linear progression. If you start at the bottom, you kind of work your way up to the top. And I wanted to see if there was a kind of thread of destiny, if there's a divinity that shapes our ends.
But could you tell, I mean, you're, say, partway through your life, this is pretty extraordinary to start writing an autobiography at this point.
That was my point, too, when I was asked, in fact, in the same week by an American publisher at the beginning of the week and by a British publisher at the end of the week. And so I thought, oh, my gosh, you know, my fate cries out. Yes.
Oh, so it just came to you accidentally?
Accidentally or on purpose, yes. I mean, let's plug that phrase again.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because I kept thinking, did he really accidentally get into acting? But no, you were working away at being on the stage?
All I knew, Joan, was that I didn't want to live my life with a feeling that, you know, I could have done it, I could have been a performer, but somehow I hadn't dared. So I thought, okay, do it, get rid of it, or, you know, it'll lead on to other things. And touch wood, it's leading on to other things.
The thing with the book.
Well, the book was a surprise. I know that Kenneth Branagh wrote a biography at the tender age of 24, and that I was, you know, 50 last month, so it's a very good kind of stopping point.
I think really more people are looking into their lives. Though reading your book, it took me back, and I thought, how did Michael remember all of these things?
Yeah,
how did you remember all those things?
Well, I thought at the outset the book would be 5 pages long.
Well, when you start thinking about it.
But it's the most extraordinary kind of act of archaeology. and you start digging away, and suddenly there's a little kind of bone, then suddenly it's a hand, then it's a whole arm, then it's a whole body. And I suppose, you know, an act of association, one thing would lead to another. And I was astonished.
But the other thing that I thought was so astonishing, to use your word, is the letters that you had. I mean, you had so much documentation. Where were you hiding all these things?
Well, that was deliberate. I don't keep a diary, but I've never been able to throw away a letter.
Oh, that's what it was.
Well, maybe because you know, the letters are such a old-fashioned things, and they take such trouble to write, that anyone who's bothered to write you a letter, I think you... Anyway, I kept all mine. They were in all these suitcases, and they'd been across the world. And so that was wonderful to go through and find, you know, letters from Tennessee Williams, for example. And wherever I could stop the action and stop saying I, me, one, and let someone else take over and give an authentic voice, like Nick Meyer, my friend, writing about the Kent State Massacre, just after it had happened, a real kind of historical viewpoint.
Did he draw from things that were happening all around? I mean, I think you drew from the letters. It seems that the letters then pushed you along. Your letters.
The films, too, because I was very lucky to make films earlier on, which are a kind of diary. I mean, every frame of them is redolent of experience, and so that kind of helped. Although, you know, people say, what's your favorite film? And I'm completely kind of nonplussed, because there's a total double standard. On the one level, there's the artistic achievement, if at all, and then there's the life experience one had making it. And often the one, you know, outweighs the other.
But you do go through the films and you talk about what happened on the sets and as it goes along. So I can see that, too, was helpful, just what you're saying. I'm trying to figure out how you could go back and find all those details. I was reading last night the part about Pat and what when she was stricken in India, and what the doctor said, and how the ambulance people responded.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, how do you remember the details?
That was a very vivid chapter, because it was a very vivid time, and a very kind of seminal time, because we just met, we just kind of agreed to marry each other, we just proposed, and then suddenly she was dying. So I try to point out in the book, I don't dwell on the down times, the dark passages, because there are, if you have any life goes up and down.
And if you're
in
honest.
Career. Sure, but I try to learn from them. And it could have been a different kind of book, but it would have meant betraying a lot of confidences.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you. Did you leave out scandal? Was there scandal involved in many of the situations?
I know it's very fashionable at the time, the kind of kiss and tell and so on. But maybe whether you have to live with yourself, and I just couldn't do it that way. I suddenly realized when you're dealing with words, they are weapons. I didn't want to kind of use mine as a kind of act of terrorism.
So there is scandal that we haven't heard about.
No, I don't know. I mean, as I said, we can all talk and chatter and gossip, and everyone. I love a good gossip as much as anyone, but I think in private. I don't want to parade it out, and I didn't want to hurt people's feelings or get even or whatever. I didn't want to use it for that. I wanted it to be positive and hopefully uplifting, because I've got so much to share, so much enthusiasm and, you know, and positive, creative moments.
It does seem also to me like almost theater. It comes across when you say positive and what you wanted to explain. It comes across like that.
Well, I didn't want to sell it as a kind of awful kind of Pollyanna exercise. Because if you draw all the teeth, then again, that's untruthful. Because so it had to have some, you know, grit as well.
You know, we always talk about the cabaret part, and I know you were living your film and how you felt after you had made it, and the artistic quality of it, and were you worried about how did it show through the artistry of the work and of Christopher Isherwood's the interpretation of Christopher's work? And is there anything in the book where we can have you read just a little bit about it?
Oh my goodness.
A little bit.
You know, I've recorded the book, by the way.
Have you?
Yes. It was, and I also edited it. It was the most fiendish thing I've ever done in my life, because of, you know, this is, well, it's, you know, it's a book. To get this down to 18,000 words And also, to edit yourself down to, conceive what you think is important, to leave out so much. It was very painful, but...
Let's talk about it. Just how did you physically write the book? How long did it take you?
It took 2 years, and I was all over the world. In fact, I list the places where I wrote it here at the end. There are all these places here, and at one point I listed all the flights that I wrote it on.
Oh, you did? So you just were handwriting it?
Oh, yes. The strange thing happened as soon as I wrote chapter 1 on my yellow pad, because I'm not computer-friendly at all. So it seemed to unleash this kind of cosmic energy that I was never busier in my day job. I mean, I was going from one thing to the other, which is unusual. In an actor's life, you usually have these bursts of energy, a little downtime, because you don't usually go from one thing to the other. But not in my case. It was insane, and I was getting...
You just were compelled?
Well, I had a deadline, and there's a good reason why they call them deadlines.
Yes.
And I wanted to finish. In the end, the English publisher was very anxious to have it, because 3/4 of all English books are sold in the 3 months before Christmas.
So
there was an economic reason to get it done, but also the sense of satisfaction of just finishing it.
So read with your wonderful voice.
Oh, come on, Joan. Well, you did mention cabaret, so I mean,
And then we'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll go through a few of the chapters and some of the people.
You will?
Yeah, go on. I'd like to hear
I
you.
have to tell your listeners, this is all sprung on me, that usually when people are asked to improvise or whatever, they've been rehearsing for 2 weeks.
That's a very good point.
You asked me to do this 2 minutes ago.
Exactly.
I want this to be borne in mind.
It is borne in mind.
All right. 2 weeks later, we were back in Munich, our Mercedes greedily devouring the concreted kilometers spanning its motherland. Having bade a fond au revoir to raffish endearing Ferguson, it was time to say willkommen to a total stranger, Herr Brian Roberts. Luxuriating in the confines of the Hotel Continental, I now gave my undivided attention to the screenplay of Cabaret, and was horrified. Despite repeated, ever more desperate readings of the script, I could find no role to play. Isherwood had turned himself into a camera, and his pallid screen doppelganger, even though contemporary permissiveness now allowed his bisexuality to be overt, shared the same voyeuristic passivity. My American agent's warnings were amply fulfilled. I cursed myself for my arrogant pride in pursuing the role. Here was another introspective, literate Englishman in the Dali mold, another dull foil to all the brilliant extrovert characters enlivening the story. I was furious with myself. Past experience had made me determined never to commit to a script about which I felt half-hearted, but somehow the difficulties of communication in Morocco and my usual obsessive involvement in the work at hand had botched this resolve. Reality now stared me rudely in the face. That night I paced the damp city streets in panicky desperation, wondering what to do. Besides being foreign to my nature to do so, it was too late to withdraw. I hardly knew Bob Fosse, and moreover, was reluctant to give him the impression of being a self-centered neurotic before filming had even started. I resolved to meet him and unburden myself of all these reservations. To my relief and delight, Fosse, bearded, balding, and blackly clad, agreed with me. He reassured me that he had intended to rehearse and review the dialogue during the 2 weeks scheduled for the song and dance rehearsals. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And then you resolved it with Fosse, didn't you?
That's right, yes.
And it came out to be something that was a type of collaboration for you. You felt more comfortable.
Well, we had those 2 weeks to kind of improvise and create, and it was a wonderful, unexpected, and I keep banging this word, but creative time. Yeah.
I think it's. I'd love to hear the book on tape. I think it's great to have people reading the book on tape. This is really
I love
great.
listening to books. I mean, this is how we exercise in the morning. I love going for walks here up in the Hollywood Hills, and I listen to books.
And you put it.
Oh, yes.
That's great.
And you go the extra mile just to get to an end of a chapter.
The one thing is, just listening to a few, I feel like they leave a few things out. I guess you have to in the course. But you always have the book, and I go, if something interests me, I can go back and read in depth. But
there are books that, there are companies that do unabridged versions
too.
Oh, they do?
Yes. Oh, I see.
So you have a whole massive text.
Well, there's a great story on Cordobés, the Toreador in here, and how he was so. Tell us a little bit about the story.
Benjamin Disraeli said that, when a man falls into his anecdotage, it's time for him to retire from life.
So you're not going to anecdote?
No, but if you're ever, talking to a journalist, the only thing they want is an anecdote. And
exactly.
so
here I am asking you.
I dredged up all my anecdotes, and here they are.
So that was good.
And it was fun. It was really fun to, to cast this net into the whole sea of memories. And
when I was you haven't given up the stage, and you haven't given up film. And
No, I mean, what all this massive retrospection did, in fact, was to, not to kind of close a chapter, but somehow it's dealt with. Now I really look to the future with a really renewed enthusiasm.
Well, we know in the book, or I know in the book, that you've talked about Pat, your wife, very lovingly all through the whole book.
It's a love story, yeah.
It is. There's just, as you say, you found an underlying thread of what's going on in your life, and I see that happened. We're going to take a break, and we're going to talk to Pat.
Great.
So
I think
we'll
you'll
be
enjoy
right
it.
back. We'll be right back. Watch for us. Hi, we're back on Joan Quinn, etc. And joining Michael York on the set, and this is a new set for us. It's all plantation furniture from Central America. And Kathleen Spiegelman and Norman Stewart, who do the sets, were looking at this furniture, and they thought it was so great because it's all woven by the coffee pickers on the plantations in Central America. So we're happy to have it today. And we're happy to have Pat McCallum York, joining her husband Michael York with us. Pat worked as a photographer most of her life. She was a travel editor at Glamour magazine, where she wrote and took the pictures. She's been on assignment for Vogue and Time and People and a lot of magazines. I've worked on magazines with Pat in the past. Her professional work, which of course she's a professional, has been on exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery in London and the International Center of Photography in New York. She was a staff photographer for many movies: Barbarella, Logan's Run, The Three Musketeers, Cabaret, to mention a few. And from the looks of these movies, Pat, it doesn't seem like you're very far from Michael's side.
Well, we always travel together, but I'm not a star photographer. It's called a special photographer.
On the set?
Yeah, and then you just go in for a day that you think would be good here and a day there. So what that did, rather than being on the set all the time, which would be very boring, you just go on the days where you think the work is the best for photographs. But what it did do to me was for me, wherever we were, like we've been in Morocco and Italy, Germany, India, it allowed me to go and photograph people, politicians or travel photographs in all these countries we've traveled to, which was great. So I wasn't just doing actors and actresses, much as I like them. I wanted to do a photograph people from all walks of life.
So you just worked, when you were on set, you just worked the whole area.
Yes, exactly.
I thought that a staff photographer, or whatever they call them, I don't know.
They call them unit photographers, but they go in the morning till the evening, which would be, to me, a horrendous job.
You don't do that?
No, I just go in, it's called a special photographer, and you go in for the days that you think would be interesting to photograph on the particular movie. Well, the days are the most photogenic.
Who gives that assignment?
The producer always would ask me, yes.
Well, you've written, you're the writer in the family. I don't know if you influenced Michael to write his book.
No, I earned my living as a writer. I've always thought Michael was a much better writer. And then I went on a trip with David Bailey in the 60s when with my first job. I was a travel editor of Glamour. I worked for Vogue for a while in the fashion department, then I became the travel editor of Glamour. And then I went with David Bailey on this trip, and we were in Japan, and I bought a Nikon, and he gave me lessons.
That's when you started.
And then when I went back, we were in Africa together afterwards.
Say what he said. He said it's like
some of the
learning
things
to drive in a Ferrari.
She started out in
Yes,
a
well, this incredible equipment that I bought in Japan with him, and he said it was like someone who had never driven a car buying a Ferrari. But he did. By the time I got back to New York, I knew I had this passion for photography, and I showed my work to Alex Lieberman, and he was the overall art director, or still is, of Condé Nast, and he liked it, and I started going out on small assignments, and then it became a passion. And then at one point I was sent to photograph Raquel Welch in Spain, and while I was there I got a cable to photograph someone called Michael York, who had just come out in a film called Accident.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's how we met.
Oh, I'm so glad you told us that story, because I was going to ask you about it anyway. Oh, great.
Yes.
And so you went on to do a special assignment?
No, it was just, it was what people are talking about. And Michael was this new hot young actor that had opened in 2 films. His first 2 films were Taming of the Shrew and Accident. And I was sent to photograph him, and that was it, you know.
He wasn't in the bull ring.
He wasn't in the bull ring now.
No. In the bull ring yet. I want to show your book. The book is called Going Strong, and it's about people from 75 years old and up.
Yes, so all the criteria they have in common is that the youngest is 75 and the oldest is 104, and they're all still working, and they have no intention of retiring. And there are 70 people, and they've from all walks of life, all economic backgrounds, and all ethnic backgrounds, and they're absolutely terrific people. They are living examples of how we should all live our lives.
This is a coffee table book, so I'll put it on our coffee table.
Oh, great, thank you. On your South American coffee
on
table.
Our Central American plantation.
Central American.
Yes, we'll put it there. But who started the project first? His book took 2 years. How long did your book take?
Mine took about 22 months, and it's so interesting because so many things in our lives are like that. Completely separately, we thought we'd both like to do a book. I had become very, more and more of my assignments were on actors and actresses, and much as I like them, I didn't want to get into a groove of never doing anything else, but perhaps because I was married to Michael, everybody kept asking me, all the magazines wanted me to do with celebrities.
Yes.
And the book is a tribute to my grandmother, because although she was statistically older, she had no idea of her age. And
because she just kept
going?
She
was so young and so wonderful and such an inspiration to me as a child and as a young adult, that I wanted to do something that would show how I felt, because I think there's such a taboo on aging in America, which is so sad.
It is true.
It is,
and
absolutely.
One of the things, working with people at this age, would you be worried that your project would, maybe something would happen to one of these people before your project was
finished? No, what I would do, I would interview them first, and then I would photograph them. So that if there was any barrier between us, it would be broken down by the time I photographed them. But I thought even if people die by the time the book comes out, they would be examples, because they were actually working till the end of their life. And only 3 people have died, and one of them was Norman Cousins, and it was the last thing he wrote, the foreword to the book.
He wrote the foreword.
He wrote the foreword. It's so beautiful. He gave it to me on Tuesday and died on Friday, but he was in the middle of a business meeting. And only 2 other people have died, which is amazing, because
but was Norman included as one of the subjects?
No, he did the foreword.
That's right.
Yes,
so he
exactly.
wasn't even included.
No, but he was it's such a witty and funny foreword that we wanted to keep it in. It was a great privilege for me to have him write the foreword, and he loved the book.
I was at the Ritz-Carlton in the Marina, and he had given a lecture that I guess Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever, and 2 days later.
Yes, he died.
But it was so, as you say, inspirational, and just to have the words jotted down that he was talking about, and the way you should look at your life and what you should do.
Yes.
And I think you did it here. What were some of the things that you found a common thread?
Well, they all arrive at their philosophies of their life and work in a different way, but they all have in common a great zest and lust for life, and they all dare to dare. They jump in. None of them are timid souls. I mean, I have very well-known people, some in the entertainment world like George Burns, John Kenneth Galbraith, Julia Child, but I have wonderful unknown people too, doctors, botanists, gardeners.
How did you find them?
They were more difficult to find than well-known people. And what I don't like to talk about what I'm doing, but in this case I did. And one person would tell me about someone they knew, and I would do some research, and that's how it happened. I would just go from one person to another, and I could have done 2 or 3 books, because in the end, people calling me up and asking me if they could be in my book.
That's great.
Yeah.
And what were you doing, Michael? Well, she was writing and searching.
Well, I was writing and searching internally too. I did. I mean, I was. She gave me the privilege of carrying her bags to several encounters, which was
So you
wonderful.
did go along with her on one or two?
This is what Gore Vidal told me in the book, that if you're ever on a TV show, you must always put your arm over.
So then you can't be.
You can't be cut off. I hope this,
Oh, is that
I
what
hope
you
this
do?
is
You're
true. Yes,
moving
this
in.
is a guarantee of 2 shots.
Yes, that's a guarantee too. And when you're carrying her bag, you have to move close too.
That was. It was. As Pat said, there's always been a synchronicity in our lives. Very, very odd. Right from the start.
So you didn't have to worry about schedules.
No, I work on Romeo and Juliet. Who was asked by Vogue to go and photograph them, Juliet, but Pat.
Yeah,
This is a few weeks
Oh,
after
she
we
didn't
met.
get the assignment because of you?
No, absolutely not at all. Independently.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah,
I think
it was.
it's
It
so
was-
much, yeah. It's kind of something that people don't think. I mean, I've known you for a long time, and I always think, well, Michael's making a movie, Pat's a photographer, so this is the perfect place for her. But it doesn't always work like that.
I've loved, actually, that we've, as Pat said, shared everything. And that means the rough and the smooth.
But Michael, yeah, and you were wonderful when the book was coming up, when I was doing the book, because Michael would write, he would come with me if I was in South Carolina or this place or that place, and he would just write in the hotel room. And as I said, carry my bags on the plane. And so we were together, which was great, but doing our own independent work, which is also terrific.
Did you write longhand the same way he did?
Well, I did mine on tape, and then it was put on a computer, and then I'd edit it. It was, I'd edit. I mean, Clark Clifford gave me 4 hours, which I have on tape, and because of the format of the book, I had to edit the interviews.
That's what Michael started talking about when he said he was editing, and you have to get rid of everything. I mean, not everything, but a lot that you think is so important.
Well, Noel Coward said, if you love it, cut it.
And we know how successful he was.
Yes, exactly.
You two live in Beverly Hills.
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
Nothing so grand.
Oh, yes, true.
On the
Looking
edge
down
there.
on Beverly Hills, excuse me. And you're both really workaholics. Do you ever find time to entertain, or?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
I
I
think
love
that, no, I mean, I love work.
And I like a balance, too, in our
yes,
lives, don't we?
yes.
We both do.
I think that's essential.
Do you entertain at home, or what do you do?
Yes.
Oh, you
Yeah,
do?
we've just been entertaining our 2 little grandchildren for the last 6 days,
That's why
which
we
has
look
been
slightly
great.
battered and out of it. They left this morning.
Is your son? You have
Yes,
a son?
uh-huh.
Well, I don't want to
Yes.
ask how old he is because
He's in his 30s, and he's actually produced the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which are wonderful.
Is he living
Yeah.
here?
Well, he's been all over the world
Which
right
is
now.
actually, this is what Pat was, a gypsy fortune teller once looked at her hand and said, my goodness, this is the most traveling hand I've ever seen. Anyone you get into contact with will be affected. So it's happened to me, and it's certainly happened to Rick. But
Happened to Rick.
he's produced this round the world, literally.
Ah, but where is his house?
Well, his house is in London, although he's American, and his wife's American. But his job is all over the world, yeah.
And we have to leave. You have to leave. We have to leave. It always goes so fast. But as Britons, very quickly, what do you love about L.A.?
I'm American.
You're American? Oh, good. Good.
I can say it. It's
You can
all
say
about the present and the future, which I love, especially having had this great retrospection. It suits me fine.
And we're going to keep looking for you in the future, and we're living in the present now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being with us on Joan Quinn, etc. And thank you to Pat and Michael York.
Thank
See you
you.
next